The barn was already half gone by the time he got the doors open. Flames clawed out through the roof slats like the devil himself had taken up residence in the hayloft. Smoke poured thick and low, curling across the darkened corral, where the horses screamed and reared against their ropes. The heat was sharp enough to cut the breath, and when the wind shifted, it rolled the fire sideways toward the stables. Eli Morgan didn't think. He just moved. He ducked inside without so much as a rag over his mouth, boots sliding on scorched planks, his coat already catching embers. Inside was chaos. Shattered oil lamp on the floor, walls cracking from heat, and somewhere near the back, a shape moving. Not a horse. Not a man either. She was crouched near the stall wall, barefoot, hair wild, arms wrapped around her body like a child trying to stay invisible. One eye was nearly swollen shut. The other stared through the smoke without blinking. Eli staggered toward her. "Ma/M," he coughed, grabbing her arm, but she didn't flinch, didn't move, like she couldn't hear him, like she was already gone. He scooped her up with one arm under her knees, the other behind her shoulders, and turned back toward the open door. The barn groaned around him. A beam snapped and fell just behind his boots, and smoke surged harder, so thick he could barely see. But he ran. Outside, he fell to his knees in the dirt with her in his arms, coughing like he'd swallowed soot straight from the devil's chimney. And that's when she looked up at him, really looked, mouth trembling, eyes glassy. Then she spoke. One word. A name. Soft, hoarse, but clear. It was his dead wife's name. He hadn't heard that name in 6 years. And never from a stranger. But let's go back to where it all started. Morgan Ranch sat at the edge of the Red Hills, where the cottonwoods grew bent from wind and the soil turned to clay when it rained. It was decent land, though nobody called it good. The fields didn't give easy, and what came up from them was earned, not gifted. Eli had worked it alone ever since Anna died. He didn't talk much in town. Folks said he'd been a soldier, maybe in Kansas, maybe farther. All anyone knew for sure was that he'd come back with a shattered leg and a haunted look, and after burying his wife under the big sycamore by the creek, he'd never so much as danced at the church socials again. But he was fair, didn't cheat his help, didn't drink much, kept to himself. And that morning, before the fire, he was just patching a fence post by the lower meadow, minding his own damn business, when young Tom Lancer rode up wild-eyed on a borrowed pony. "Your barn," the boy gasped. "Smoke comin' out the roof." Eli didn't wait for a saddle. He mounted bareback and galloped hard, heart already thrashing in his chest. Could have been a lightning strike. Could have been a busted lantern. Could have been kids fooling around. But it wasn't. When he got close enough to smell the smoke, he also saw the boot prints. Not his. Too small. A trail of them, some barefoot, some not, around the back, near the side door that stayed bolted from the inside. Someone had been there. Recently. He kicked the door in, and that's where we began. Heat, flame, and a woman who shouldn't have been there. They lay together in the dirt for a minute while the barn roared itself down behind them. Eli kept his hand on her back, feeling the rise and fall of breath, like proof she hadn't died on him already. She didn't speak again, just stared at him with those two wide eyes, like she was trying to remember if he was real or not. "Can you walk?" he asked. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, but when he helped her stand, she held onto his coat like it was the last thing keeping her on this side of the world. He led her to the porch, sat her down, and fetched a bucket of water from the well. Gave her a dipper, which she didn't use, just held. The fire died by itself. No one else came. When he went back to where she'd been crouching in the barn, he found the ground charred, but saw no blanket, no food, no sign she'd been hiding there for long, except a small pendant. It was scorched but intact. Silver. Navajo make, by the look of it. He didn't touch it yet. Back on the porch, she sat quiet. Her skin was bruised in places, some of it fresh, some of it old. Her lips were cracked, but her eyes were dry. "Who did this to you?" he asked, sitting beside her. No answer. "Were you runnin' from someone?" Still nothing. He leaned back, hands resting on his thighs, staring out at the dying smoke. You said a name in there. Anna. He looked sideways. That's my wife's name. The woman blinked slowly. Eli's throat tightened. How do you know that name? This time her mouth parted, but no sound came out. Her hand drifted to her throat, touched a scar he hadn't noticed until now. A thin white line running horizontal, just above the collarbone. Someone had cut her voice out, and yet somehow in that fire she'd spoken. She stared at him like she wanted to speak again, desperately, but couldn't. And Eli Morgan, who hadn't cried since the day he folded Anna's dress for the last time, found his jaw clenching hard against something rising inside him. Something like grief, something like belief, or maybe just the start of a new kind of trouble. By nightfall, the fire was out, the horses were calmed, and the woman still hadn't spoken again. She'd taken shelter in the lean-to behind the house, where he'd set down a cot and brought in blankets and a tin basin of water. She hadn't bathed, but she washed her face with slow, deliberate movements. Her hands trembled only when she reached her bruised throat. Eli watched her from the back door, one hand resting on the frame, unsure whether he was standing guard or just trying to believe what had happened. The air smelled like ash and soaked wood. Half the barn had collapsed, and the wind had shifted north, carrying the smoke toward the town, which meant someone would come. And they did. The next morning, just past sunrise, 3 riders crested the ridge. Deputy Clay Farrow, old Josiah Hill from the feed store, and the preacher's boy, Thomas, who held the reins like a snake might leap from them. Eli met them halfway up the drive. Clay dismounted first, boot heels grinding dry dirt. Word got around, he said, squinting at the smoldering ruin. Heard there was a fire. Eli gave a slow nod. Barn caught. Caught how? Don't know yet. Josiah leaned over his saddle horn, frowning. You all right? I am. Clay's eyes narrowed. We heard there was someone seen runnin' from here last night. Someone dark-haired, wearin' not much. Eli didn't blink. And who told you that? Tom Lancer said he thought he saw someone when he came to warn you. Just a glimpse. Eli didn't answer. Clay stepped forward, lowering his voice. Eli, you got someone in that house? Still, Eli said nothing. Josiah cleared his throat. Look, son, there've been rumors. Out east, Navajo raids. Apache too. One of the Monroe girls got taken 2 months back. That kind of thing puts folks on edge. She ain't Apache, Eli said. Then who is she? I don't know, but she was in the barn when it caught. She's hurt. Does she talk? Clay asked. Eli hesitated. Not much. Not much, Josiah repeated slowly. Or not at all? She's got a scar, Eli said. Looks like someone made sure she couldn't. The men exchanged glances. Clay looked over Eli's shoulder toward the house. You check with Doc Haverly? No. You plan to. She don't trust easy. I'm giving her time. Josiah spit into the dust. You sure she ain't trouble? No, Eli said. But I'm sure she didn't set that fire. You got proof of that? Eli looked him in the eye. I pulled her out of it. Silence stretched out like barbed wire. Finally, Clay sighed and backed off a step. All right, but you know how it goes, Eli. Town's nervous. Some folks still say you buried your grief too deep. That maybe a man with nothing left might invite trouble just to feel again. Eli's jaw locked. You tell those folks I still got a name, still got land, still know right from wrong. Clay nodded slowly. Then don't give them a reason to forget that. The riders turned and mounted again. Josiah didn't say goodbye. Eli watched the dust rise behind them. He didn't move until they were gone. Later that afternoon, he went to check on her. She was sitting cross-legged on the dirt floor of the lean-to, holding a piece of old burlap sack. On it, she'd used ash and water to draw rough shapes, symbols maybe, not letters he recognized. He stepped in gently, crouching down beside her. Is this your language? She paused, looked at him, then nodded once. You understand English? Another nod. He pointed to one of the marks. What's this mean? She touched the mark, then her chest. Her lips parted again, and she pressed her fingers gently to her throat. Then she tried to write a name in the ash, slow and shaky. It looked like Soli. Is that your name? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Soli, he whispered. She held up a finger. 1. Then pointed at him. 2. Then back at the symbol. 3. He frowned. You mean, I'm the second to hear it? She nodded. He sat back, dusting his hands off on his knees. And the first? Was Anna? Something changed in her face then. A flicker of sorrow, maybe, or fear, but not denial. That night, the neighbors came. 3 wagons. For men on horseback, lanterns swaying. Eli saw them coming from the ridge and didn't wait. He met them in the dark, lantern in his own hand. Hill, he said. Preacher. Danvers. Josiah cleared his throat. Eli Towns a skin questions. I heard. We just want to see her. Talk to her. Make sure she ain't who folks are whisperin' she is. She can't speak, Eli said. She's not a threat. Danvers rode up closer. It ain't about threat. It's about truth. And who decides that? The preacher shifted in his seat. Eli, you've always been a man of reason. But you're harboring someone, and people are scared. She was in my barn, Eli said. She was burning, and I pulled her out. That's all. Josiah's voice was tight. If she's got nothing to hide, why not bring her out? Eli turned to look at the house, then back. Because I made her a promise. That she'd be safe here. The men didn't speak for a while. The wind blew cool across the grass. Somewhere, a coyote yipped once and fell silent. Danvers pulled his reins. You do what you think is right, Eli. But don't expect folks to back you if it turns out you were wrong. And with that, they turned back, wagons groaning. Eli stood alone in the dark, the lantern flickering against his jaw. When he turned toward the house again, Soli was standing just outside the lean-to, watching. No fear, no surprise, just the kind of quiet that came from people who had run too long to be startled anymore. He walked toward her slowly, voice low. You still want to stay here? She didn't nod. She just stepped forward and took his hand. The third day brought silence and smoke on the northern hills. Eli stood on the porch with his hand resting on the worn post, staring past the fence line. It was too far to see clearly, but he knew the shape of it. Campfires. At least 3. He hadn't seen anyone ride in or out of town in that direction lately, and the old trail that led through those hills was hardly used except by scouts or worse, searching parties. Behind him, the screen door creaked. He didn't turn. She's watching too, came a voice. It was Ruthie, the black woman who helped him cook and clean once a week since Anna passed. She stood barefoot in the doorway, arms crossed, apron damp with dishwater. She been at the window since you saw that smoke, she said. Ain't blinked. I noticed. You think it's them? He didn't answer. Ruthie stepped down beside him. I seen that mark on her pendant. Navajo, ain't it? Eli glanced at her. Could be. You remember what happened last time the town stirred up fear over a Navajo girl? Her voice was sharp, clipped. I do. They turned her over to the law, said she stole a chicken. She never came back. He looked down at his hands. Soli's no thief. She don't have to be. Not to be hated. Ruthie paused, then said gently, You're the only reason she's not already hanging from a tree in someone else's orchard. He let the words settle. Ruthie sighed. You're gonna have to decide what kind of protection you're off, Aaron. 'Cause them fires mean someone's comin', and I don't think they're bringin' questions. Later that evening, Soli took her plate outside. Eli watched from the kitchen as she sat alone near the broken barn wall, the low sun painting her silhouette in gold and ash. She didn't eat right away. She just held the bread in her hand like it was a memory. He stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee and offered her one. She took it with both hands, nodded her thanks. He sat down on the overturned trough beside her. You see the smoke? He asked. She nodded once. Do you know them? A pause. Then, a slight shake of the head. But you think they're looking for you. She didn't move for a long while. Then, slowly, she reached for the edge of her sleeve and pulled it back. The scars on her arm weren't from work or fire. They were ceremonial. Raised ridges in a half-moon pattern, carved and healed. Tribal. But near the top of her shoulder was a newer mark. Fainter. A brand. Not tribal. Cattle. Eli stared, his throat tightening. Someone marked you like livestock. Her jaw set. He whispered, "Why?" She picked up a stick and started drawing in the dirt again. This time, no symbols. Just a crude figure, stick limbs, long hair, hands bound. Then another figure holding something, maybe a whip or maybe a firebrand. He got the message. You were taken. A slow nod. And you escaped. She looked up at him, eyes filled with a storm that hadn't broken yet. Eli stared out at the hills. Then I reckon someone out there don't think you belong to yourself yet. That night, the drums started. Not war drums. Not loud or threatening. But steady. Low. Like a warning whispered through the ribs of the earth. Eli stood in the yard long after dark, shotgun over one shoulder, watching the ridgeline. There was no firelight now, just shadow. Ruthie came to the porch and didn't say a word. She just set down a lantern and went back inside. Soli stepped up beside him sometime after that. He didn't hear her until she was right there. She had her pendant in her hand, thumb rubbing over the metal. They're watchin', Eli said. Waiting. She didn't move. You know why they'd be watchin'? She hesitated, then nodded once. He turned toward her. Soli, I need you to tell me the truth now, however you can. Are they your people? She looked away. Did you run from them? Or are they comin' for justice? For you? Or for what happened to you? She turned back to him, and with both hands, she slowly brought the pendant up between them, then placed it in his hand. He looked down at it. On the back was a name scratched by hand into the silver. A single word in English, Anna. His chest went cold. He looked up at her. She was staring at him with something soft. Remorse. Maybe grief. He whispered, You knew her. Soli nodded once. Where? She knelt quickly, grabbed a stick, and wrote again in the dust. White Fort. Eli's stomach dropped. That was the army's old outpost, abandoned now. But it had once held over 50 women taken from their homes, some for re-education, others as hostages during the border conflicts. And Anna had worked there, volunteered years before they married, teaching, nursing. He had never asked much about that time. He looked up at Soli, heart pounding. She helped you escape. Soli nodded, and her hand, shaking now, moved to her throat. She tapped it gently, then held up 2 fingers. 2 soldiers. They did that to you? She nodded again. Eli's eyes burned. And Anna, she helped you. She. He couldn't finish. Soli reached into her pouch and pulled out something small, wrapped in cloth. She placed it in his hands. A button, plain, ivory-colored, with a tiny pink rose in the center. Anna's. He'd watched her sew it onto her coat the winter they first courted. She used to joke it was her one fancy thing. Soli looked at him with wet eyes now. She hadn't just spoken Anna's name by chance. She'd remembered, and now someone was coming to take that memory and her away. At dawn, hoofbeats came slow through the cottonwood grove. Not a charge, not a war party, just 5 riders, quiet, covered in dust. The lead man had long gray braids, a ceremonial sash across his chest, and a rifle slung over his back. He didn't dismount, just sat there watching. Eli stepped forward, standing in the yard. The man spoke in low, careful English. We come for the woman. Eli's jaw tightened. She ran from a place of chains, the man said. But in doing so, she took something sacred. Eli frowned. What? A child, the man said. And for a moment, everything inside Eli went still. Eli didn't move. The words hung there, brittle as frost on a dry branch. A child? He asked slowly. The elder rider nodded once. A daughter of our blood, taken by soldiers when she was small, raised in cages of prayer and silence, branded like cattle. They changed her tongue, but not her soul. Eli's eyes flicked toward the lean-to. The shadows shifted behind the canvas flap. Soli was listening. She escaped, the man continued, but not alone. The girl, the one she saved, is our chief's blood. You say she took the girl? No, the elder said. She brought her home. Eli exhaled slowly. Where is she now? He asked. The elder paused. Gone. When the soldiers burned our winter camp last moon, the child fled into the desert. Some say she died. Others say the white men took her again. He looked past Eli toward the house. She was the last one to see the girl. We need her words, her truth. Eli's voice was steady, but firm. She can't speak. The elder's eyes didn't waver. She can sign, or write, or show. Silence stretched. Eli looked back at the house. She's not well. She's stronger than she looks. Eli turned to the elder again. And if she tells you what you don't want to hear? The man's mouth pressed into a line. Then we leave in peace, with sorrow, not anger. And if she refuses to come out? The elder's expression didn't change. Then we wait. He raised one hand. The other 4 riders dismounted, quiet as ghosts. They made no camp, just stood beneath the trees watching. Eli stood there for a long time, then walked back to the house. Soli sat at the kitchen table when he came in. Ruthie stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. There was no panic in the room, just that heavy stillness, like the air before a summer storm. Eli crossed to the table and sat across from her. They say they're here for answers, he said. Soli didn't look up. They say you saved a girl who belonged to them, that you took her from the fort. She nodded slowly. He leaned forward. What happened to her? Soli's hands moved to her lap, and then she began to sign. The gestures were rough, half-learned, a patchwork of signs Eli didn't fully recognize. But Ruthie did. She watched with deep eyes, translating softly. She says, they kept the girl in the church room. She was small, maybe 5. They called her Mary. She didn't remember her old name, only that her mother wore turquoise. Ruthie's voice faltered. She says one night the men were drunk. Soli saw them go toward the girl's room. She hid the child in the coal bin, kept her there until morning. Then she ran. Eli swallowed hard. She says the girl ran the other direction. They split up to increase their chances. He leaned back in the chair, fingers curled into fists. Soli slowly reached into the folds of her shawl and pulled something free. A child's beaded bracelet. Tiny, blue and white. Ruthie gasped softly. That's thine work. Eli touched it gently. You kept this. Soli nodded. He looked up at her. Do you want to speak to them? For the first time, Soli's eyes filled. Not with fear, but something like relief. She nodded. Outside, the wind shifted. Dust curled around the rider's boots. When Soli stepped out of the house, wrapped in Eli's coat, the elder straightened in his saddle. The others looked on, but none approached. Soli walked forward slowly, holding the bracelet in both hands. She stopped a few feet from the elder, knelt and raised the beaded strand. The elder dismounted, face weathered and unreadable. He took the bracelet gently. Then Soli pressed her palm to her chest and drew a circle outward twice. She says the girl was brave. Eli translated, watching. She says, she loved her like a sister. Soli turned her hands, mimicking the shape of a small child running, pointing toward the east. Then she held up 2 fingers, then one, then held her hands wide. She says they ran in opposite directions, but the girl was fast. She says, she believes she's alive. The elder stared at her for a long moment. Then he bowed his head. Another of the men stepped forward, younger, fierce-eyed. She should have stayed with her, he barked. She should have fought. The elder raised a hand, quieting him. And died in chains? No, she did what she could, with what she had. He looked at Soli. You have done enough. You owe us nothing. But Soli shook her head, then drew a circle again over her heart. She pointed east, then to her feet. Then she pointed up toward the sky. She wants to find her, Ruthie said softly from the porch. She wants to bring her home. The elder watched Soli for a long while. If you find her, child, you bring her not just to us. You bring her to yourself. He took one step back, turned to his men, and spoke in their language. Eli couldn't catch it all, but he heard enough. She has more courage than most warriors, and she carries pain like water, in silence, but overflowing. The men nodded, and without another word, they mounted and rode away. No war, no fire, no vengeance. Just wind, and dust, and quiet. That night, Eli lit a lantern and set it on the table. Soli came to stand beside him, quiet as ever. She pointed to the map he'd unrolled, where the eastern ridges met the salt plains. You think she's there? He asked. Soli nodded. He looked at the firelight flickering against her face. It's a long ride, not safe. She didn't flinch. He waited a beat, then smiled faintly. I've been needing a reason to ride again. She glanced at him, and then, without a sound, she reached across the table and took his hand in both of hers. They stood like that, while the wind scraped gently at the window panes, and the ashes of old fear settled into something new, something solid. Hope. The ride east wasn't fast. Eli didn't press the horses. The land out there was wild and whispering. Dry valleys where bones lay half buried in sand, and wind carried stories between rocks older than memory. Soli rode close behind him, her body wrapped in a blanket, pendant tucked beneath her collar. They passed no towns, no ranches, just the ghost of the old trail the soldiers once used to move their wards. As they called them, Navajo children marched in silence from home to outpost, branded and renamed. Eli knew the path. He'd guarded it once, long ago, before he'd understood what he was part of. They made camp each night beneath the stars, the fire low, no words spoken. And yet, a kind of conversation blossomed in silence. She'd pass him the coffee with both hands. He'd warm a stone to tuck beneath her blanket. They'd watch the fire together, not needing more. On the fourth day, the desert changed. Dry grass turned to shale. The sky pressed lower. And there, where two ridges met like cupped hands, stood the ruins of a chapel. Cracked walls, a fallen bell, weeds growing through the floorboards. It was the last place the girl had been seen. Soli dismounted before Eli could offer help. She walked straight to the chapel door, paused, then stepped inside. Eli followed, keeping back. Inside, it was cool and smelled of ash and old hymns. The pews were scattered. One cross still hung, splintered, but whole. Soli moved to a corner and knelt. There, barely visible in the dust, were tiny footprints. Child-sized, bare. She traced them with her fingers, then stood, turned to Eli and signed. She was here. He nodded. But not long. Soli stepped outside again, searching the horizon. Her hand moved slowly west, then north. Then her eyes fell to a strip of cloth caught in a mesquite branch. She pulled it free. Blue. Faded. The same shade as the beads on the bracelet. She pressed it to her chest and looked to Eli, eyes wide with something fierce. He nodded. We follow. They found the girl 2 days later, at the edge of an abandoned mining shack near the canyon rim. She was filthy, barefoot, clutching a rusted pail. Her eyes, too old for her face, watched them from behind a dead tree. Soli didn't move too fast, just dropped to her knees in the dust. Then she opened her hands. The girl didn't move. But when Soli reached into her coat and held out the bracelet, the same one the girl used to wear, the child blinked, then walked forward, and fell into Soli's arms like she'd never left them. Eli turned his back to give them privacy. When he looked again, Soli had tears streaming down her face, soundless, free. She cradled the girl like a daughter, rocked her like someone who'd done it every night in her dreams. And the girl, half-starved, shivering, rested her head beneath Soli's chin and finally slept. They rode back slowly, the girl nestled in Soli's arms. She didn't speak at first, just pointed at things along the trail. A bird, a rabbit, a cloud that looked like a buffalo. It wasn't until the 7th night, camped beneath cottonwoods near a dry riverbed, that her voice came. They said she died, the girl whispered. Eli looked up. Soli held her tighter, brushing the child's tangled hair with her fingers. They told me she got caught in the fire, but I knew she was alive. She turned her face up to Soli's. You came. Soli smiled with her eyes and pressed her forehead to the child's. Eli tended the fire, wiping his face with a sleeve. I used to guard places like that, he said quietly. Never saw the inside, never asked what was happening. Just stood outside with a gun and did what I was told. Soli looked at him gently. You make it right now, Ruthie had once told him. In the ways you can, even if it's late. He guessed this was how. They returned to the Red Hills by the 10th day. No one came to meet them. No one needed to. Eli built a new room beside the house, taught the girl to ride. Soli showed her how to sew and string beads. The porch became their hearth, their shelter. The town didn't ask questions after that. Maybe because the fire was forgotten. Maybe because folks saw Eli walking into town beside Soli without shame, without defense. Or maybe because Ruthie, who never missed a sermon, started calling the girl little sister of the mountain. And folks learned that peace sometimes spoke softer than war. One day in early spring, when the wildflowers pushed through the clay like tiny rebellions, the elder returned. He came alone. No rifle, no warning. He saw the girl, saw her laugh, and he wept. He stayed a single night, then left a bundle small, wrapped in deerskin. Inside were 2 necklaces, one for Soli, one for the girl, both bearing the same symbol, a branch bent but not broken. Years later, people would forget the fire, forget the barn, forget the fear, but not the girl. She grew tall, brave, carried 2 names, one English, one Dine, became a bridge between the land and its people. And when asked where she was born, she'd point to the Red Hills and say, there, in the fire. But I was pulled out by a woman with no voice and a rancher who learned to listen.